Hey, Allie. Did
Hi.
you know that honeybees never sleep?
What?
Yeah, they never sleep. They just work, 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 work.
Do they have caffeine?
I don't know. Maybe they make some caffeine with their honey, like put in their coffee, put in their tea.
I don't know. I think I
I
just
don't
need
know.
more than that to function for
Yeah,
hours on end.
like do they have like Red Bull or something? Like,
I will personally hand deliver them Red Bull.
yeah, yeah. Red Bull for bees. We're starting it now.
I'm so down for it. Well, hey everyone, we're Green Thread. I'm Allie,
And I'm Alexis.
and we're here to pull on that thread to connect you to your climate and world around you. Today we're going to be talking about some organisms that might not get the spotlight I feel like they deserve, more like unspoken heroes of the natural world. Um, but before we get into that, I did want to highlight that a lot of the heroes that we would be talking about happen to actually have a scientific definition and name, which is keystone species, which is a species who has a huge impact on their environment, whether it be like them balancing their habitat or their populations of prey, or vice versa, or if without them the whole ecosystem would collapse, whatever it may be. They're important to their environment, a few of which I know off the top of my head. Sharks, they help maintain the vitality of the ocean that they live in, also the populations of fish, and then also beavers are really good at like soil quality as well as water quality, and creating like microhabitats for other organisms that live in their same habitat. One big one that we know about is wolves, with the
I was gonna bring
Highlands.
that up, yeah.
Yeah, wolves are one of those more controversial ones, I feel like, because
Yes.
some people really don't like understand that even though, hunters might be like, well, I need the deer, but like the deer are hurting tree populations, and it's just like this negative feedback loop that people only like look at it from one like lens.
Yeah, and over the summer I went to Wyoming, and I visited Yellowstone, and of course there were a lot of things about the wolves there and about when they were killing wolves and just, everybody was like, no more wolves, we don't want the wolves. But that is it is a keystone species. It's so crucial to the Yellowstone ecosystem that was pretty devastating, and a lot of people didn't want them there. Mainly because a huge thing is wolves aren't necessarily warm and snuggly and like, oh, look at the cute little wolf over there not bothering anyone. It's like people are saying, oh, well, it's killing this other animal, so let's get rid of it because we think the other animal is cuter. Or, just
Yeah.
something more like that versus the real science of how it's interacting with the ecosystem there. So that was a huge thing that we had talked about there. But yeah, wolves are definitely a huge keystone species.
Yeah, I feel like sort of mindset you were talking about is really like I don't want to say, you know, common or normal, but it really is when it comes to like apex predators of
Mm-hmm.
any sort,
Mm-hmm.
because people are just thinking of them like being that one thing that like eats everything else, or the
Yeah.
one thing that like, is attacking everything else or declining other populations. But
Mm-hmm.
in reality, like, you take that out, okay, who's next in line? There's going to be
Yeah.
someone at top all the
Yeah.
time. But that's one of those things I'm like, equilibrium, nature will always be at equilibrium. It will always
Mm-hmm.
go back to it. It will always find a way. And, keystone species are one of the main ways that it stays at equilibrium.
Mm-hmm.
So they're more like unsung heroes that we don't really like, talk about
Mm-hmm.
when talking about, the nature and the natural world.
Mm-hmm.
The nature.
The nature.
Another one that I know of has a really bad rep, but is actually really, really good for the environment are vultures.
Yeah.
With
Yeah.
like, disease
Mm-hmm.
and even just like, you see dead things on the side of the road. The only reason why they would be picked up is maybe somebody else, but also the vultures, like
Mm-hmm.
other organisms will eat them, like decomposers.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was working at the zoo, we had two, I think, king vultures.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody that I would see walk by and like, look at them, I was like interpreting their exhibit for a little bit, and everybody just had that nasty look on
Mm-hmm.
their face. And I mean, on one side, being someone who has been where they are before I knew the importance of, that organism on their environment, I was also kind of disgusted in a
Yeah.
way. But at the same time, that's what it happens when you aren't open to learning about something.
Hmm.
Because once you do, you're like, wow, that thing is important.
Absolutely. And I feel like there's a lot of things in the environment that get a bad rap. Just any animal that's not warm and snuggly or
Hmm.
fuzzy and has big eyes and, oh, look at this cute little puppy or, whatever. Um, it just gets a bad rap. And so people don't want to necessarily protect it or care to learn about it
Right.
because it's almost like, what's in it for me?
Hmm.
Why should I care about this? Why should I think it's cute? Why should I care about it? It doesn't really serve any purpose to me aesthetically or in any way, so why should I care?
Right. Well, think of it this way, for with vultures specifically, like if they weren't here, we would probably get sick more often.
Yeah.
Not to mention, they actually do cycle nutrients throughout their ecosystem too. So things that were around that decaying matter might not have sprouted or blossomed the way that they did because the nutrients from whatever organism died, like,
Hmm.
couldn't, naturally go throughout the cycle or go through their digestive system and get back into the ecosystem
Yeah.
after. Like, there's just so many different ways that
Yeah.
I guess I just get very impatient when
Hmm.
people are just like closed-minded
I
to
do
it.
too. I do too. I get very impatient. And another unsung hero kind of that I wanted to talk about was seaweed. I was just doing a little bit of research like, okay, what do we think? What is something that's not very
Hmm.
widely talked about? And I found seaweed, and seaweed can actually absorb more oxygen than trees can, and
Wow.
they can actually grow at a much faster rate because they aren't having to fight gravity
Hmm.
because they're in the water. So they just focus on growing. They can just put all their energy towards growth, and they don't have to worry about necessarily fighting to go upward. They can just go. So they grow at a super quick rate, which can help oxygen levels and with carbon dioxide, that whole exchange that happens with trees and leaves versus um, except it's in the water. And seaweed is actually used in a lot of products as well. It can be used in food. It can be used in, I don't know, it can be used as a variety of things, but it's kind of a more sustainable way to do it as well because it grows at such a faster rate instead of cutting down a tree to make something. If you're using seaweed for it instead,
Right.
then that would be helpful. But I feel like many people don't really think about seaweed that way. You may think about it as just something like nasty. If it washes up and or touches you in the ocean, it might feel gross. But it's actually super helpful. And the farms, because you don't really have to necessarily take up land for farms, it's already
Yeah.
in the ocean. Or I found that people do make seaweed farms by just putting like a rope or like a line down something and just letting the like catching the seaweed on it and then just like harvesting it that way.
Huh.
It's really interesting. I also have to see if I can find a picture from the article I was reading and we could post it or something, but it was super interesting.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. I mean, like, I'm like you said, I kind of when I feel seaweed on my feet, it's all like
Yeah.
slimy and weird, and so like I'll kind of like brush it off or kick it off. But
Hmm.
like, I do know that whenever we see like Disney movies or
Hmm.
animations that show seaweed, it's always important,
Hmm.
for
Hmm.
the things like fish are usually the highlight of
Yeah.
the films, and so they're always like hiding in the
Yeah.
seaweed or I know there was one thing I was gonna say, but I totally forgot what it was. As far as like the importance that I've heard that seaweed has, but I know when it comes to like eating, I do tend to eat sushi a lot. So like
Yeah.
I love just even the little slivers of seaweed you can get in like the
Hmm.
packets, like the
Hmm.
little salted seaweed. Oh, those are so yummy. But that's just consumerism. That's
Yeah. Sorry.
that's not about the actual importance of seaweed.
Yeah.
But that's so weird. I mean, that is such a unsung hero. I
Hmm.
don't think I would have guessed that
Yeah.
it was, had any sort of, I guess, significant,
Hmm.
impact on the ecosystem around it.
Yeah. Especially as people who live, not necessarily right next to a shore. Like, I don't,
Yeah.
we visit the beach maybe once a year, but as someone who's not around the water all the time, or necessarily a habitat where there is seaweed in the ocean, I'm
Mm-hmm.
not thinking about it all the time. I don't really eat sushi that much, so I don't ever think about seaweed. So,
Yeah.
you know,
That's weird. I mean, kind of going off of like the non-animal aspect of unsung heroes, there's also like fungi.
Yeah,
I
for
know. I mean,
sure.
the whole name of them being fungi is kind of
Yeah.
ironic. It's like they're just fun
They're
guys.
just fun guys, they're just helping everybody out, decomposing some stuff.
Exactly. And like all of their mycorrhizae and their like, underground family
Yeah.
almost. Like I've heard of
Yeah.
trees doing that, but
Hmm.
mycorrhizae also do that too, which is
Yeah.
crazy.
I know, it's so cool. I could go off on a whole thing right now about this paper that I read, but I won't. I'll save it for later for something else.
Okay. And then one other thing that I was gonna say, another like organism I was gonna highlight are bats because I know
Yeah.
like a lot of people either are so for them or like talk so highly about them or they're like yeah they're kind of gross, which they can be gross. I mean, have you been in a cave? I mean they poop
Yeah.
everywhere. But as far as like their importance, I mean they're not only pollinators, but they also like reduce like insect populations.
Yeah.
So they have a lot of importance
Hmm.
as well. Which I mean, pollinators in general like are just very. I just want to pat them all on the back.
Yeah. Give
Like
them all a high five. A
exactly.
little tiny high five.
Exactly. Like our fact that we did a couple episodes ago, which if you're listening audibly, sorry, you'll have to not know about this, but about how they can remember faces, and you were just talking about
Yeah.
they work nonstop. Like,
Hmm.
pollinators just do it all.
They really do. And people, especially with bees, don't necessarily know the importance. A lot of times with a lot of bees, we just see that as either a threat to us or just a fear. So we just don't really care to save them or anything. We're just kind of like, oh, just squash that bee, or just people are just so
Yeah.
scared of them too. And that's another,
Yep.
I mean, just I think it's just a lack of education on bees. It's just,
Absolutely.
you're scared of what you don't know. So if people were more educated on bees and what their significance really is, they're not just here to terrorize people.
Right.
They're here for a reason. That would really help, and that we could actually facilitate some better relationships between native plants and pollinators.
Exactly. I know with like the research that I did on the pollinator side, which I had kind of known a little bit before, but a lot of the time people misconcept like all bees have stingers and
Yes.
that being afraid of them, but that's not true. In fact, only females do,
Hmm.
and most of the time the females are solitary. They're just
Hmm.
single ladies doing single
Yeah.
mothers
Yes.
working 9 to
Single
5.
working mothers.
Like Dolly Parton
Yeah,
at the
literally.
time. So it's just one of those things like you were talking about, just misinformed or uninformed, especially when it comes to also what type of bees, because I know a lot of
Hmm.
people do talk about honeybees and that being the save the bee. And I know people decorate their homes in bee style stuff and say save the bee and don't really know what it means. But
Hmm.
truth be told, honeybees are are non-native, and we have kind of like domesticated them. But there are like over, I don't want to say, I think it was like 4,000 or 20,000, one of the two. I'll have to like put a little edit here, of how many native bees there are in the US that are like, either endangered
Oh,
or,
wow.
are their numbers are just declining because there's not enough resources because honeybees are taking their resources.
Yeah.
So I think it's also just like staying informed on, what type of bee that you want around you, because if you say you wanted to start a bee farm, a lot of people do, and that's great. I think that's a great idea, but doing your research about how to get started and like what species of bee that you want to like to house, because you don't want to put something into the environment that's actually going to like collapse an entire ecosystem.
Hmm.
And even just because you're trying to do good, like your intention can be good but the outcome might not be as great.
Yeah. And there's a couple people in my scientific communication class, actually. One of them is doing a paper on native plants versus invasive plants, and
Mm-hmm.
someone else is doing one on why we should save native bees and shift our focus from honeybees. And it's really, all of it is really interesting. But we were talking in class the other day, and in the state of Georgia, there's actually a license plate you can get that has a bee on it, and it says save the honeybee.
Oh,
So that's how far that not correct information can
yeah.
go. It can go that high to people who make decisions like that and get it literally, it has a photo of a bee. I'll find a picture of it. We'll insert it or post it somewhere because it drives me nuts. It drives me insane because like people really don't know. People
Exactly.
have no idea, and people probably see that license plate. They're like, "Oh, save the honeybee. That's so cute. Let's save honeybees. Let's go buy honey this weekend at the farmers market." But it's misinformation, and it
I
just
know.
makes me so frustrated.
Yeah.
But yeah, the importance of native bees and native plants
Mm-hmm.
goes hand in hand, and I think that needs to be talked about way more than it is.
Absolutely, which actually leads me to the next part of this was with native plants and green spaces,
Mm-hmm.
because there are so many different plots of land. I even think around my house that are just barren.
Yes.
And that's the traditional lawn is looked
Yes.
at as the aesthetic lawn, which ew.
Ew, disgusting.
I mean, not to mention, because people are like, okay, well, I like it and it looks good, but actually, do you know it's worse for your health that way? Because not only are you taking away biodiversity around you, but you're also taking away ways to reduce carbon dioxide out of the air, to reduce heat. I mean, if
Mhm.
you went to a park and you didn't see any trees to sit under, you're gonna have a heat wave.
Yeah,
Oh,
absolutely.
it is so important for native plants to be planted rather than just bulldoze in a
Mhm.
way. I mean, I guess it's also a struggle with where you live, because I live in a subdivision and we have to abide by HOA, and
Oh, okay, yeah.
so if it were up to me, we would be having tall
Absolutely.
grass and plants.
Absolutely.
It's in my head. It's here.
It's the thought that counts.
Yeah, I know. But so I know a lot of people will probably struggle with the same thing. They have to abide by guidelines. But if you have the ability, please do it, because your yard and the wildlife around you is going to thank you.
Yes, so much. And we were talking about this in a different class the other day too, about the whole aesthetic of lawns and keeping
Mm-hmm.
it clean cut and trimmed
Yep.
and no tall grass, no plants, which is really interesting. Like after we record this, I'm looking it up because I need to know what the shift was of, or has it always been this way? Have people always wanted a clean cut looking lawn? Like when
Mm-mm.
did that become the preference? When did that become the norm, And
Right.
and that's another thing too that feeds into the HOA thing. Like we have created
Mm-hmm.
associations that will put guidelines and restrictions on the way that your lawn looks for aesthetic purposes, which is crazy. That is crazy. Like how have we got to this point? That is insane to me.
Yeah, because I mean, you were mentioning maintaining, but that just not just cutting, but also using pesticides and fertilizers,
Yes.
and people even spray stuff on their lawns to not have their grass grow
Mhm.
a certain rate, and I'm like, those things are going straight back into your lungs,
Yeah.
causing respiratory issues, cancer,
Yeah.
things you might not feel for the next 30 years, all for you to have a pretty lawn.
Mhm.
For your neighbors to clap as they go down
Yeah.
the street.
Yeah.
Who are you trying to impress?
Exactly. It's just not worth it. It's not worth it for the wildlife in the area. It's not worth it for you long term. It's not worth it for anyone. It's just
Yep.
better to facilitate those natural relationships and to help the native ecosystem that is trying to thrive here, and we're just squashing it. We need to create more native spaces, native plants, so native pollinators, native
Agreed.
animals can come in and kind of reclaim their space.
Agreed. And I mean, all of this sounds kind of sad, because we're like, okay, well, what do we do? How do we help? Well, I do know there's different green spaces in specific cities and around you that you can support, or maybe
Hmm.
volunteer for, and just get insight into how they're able to maintain their space and even just use their space, because that's another thing. Mental health and native spaces go hand in hand.
Oh yeah.
I don't think you could be outside and not be and be stressed or
Yeah.
have some sort of negative emotion. But I know so we're near Atlanta, and Atlanta has a Beltline,
Hmm.
which is a great, great, great walkway that has tons of
Hmm.
wildlife and native plants and everything. And they even have, you can work for the Beltline,
Yeah.
and educate youth, and, do a bunch of volunteer stuff for them too. So it's not just, having to walk miles to see things. You
Right.
can also be, involved, even further. But there's also, I know Highline in New York City, the Golden Gate Park in San Francisco. There's a few other different spaces, and just your local parks. I mean, that kind of does go on to the idea of supporting the traditional lawns,
Hmm.
because a lot of times they do just have flat
Yeah.
grass, but at the same time, just using your green spaces. And even maybe like talking to the people that work at those parks to see if there's a way for them to incorporate something.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times public like ideas and public knowledge goes a long way.
Absolutely.
I mean, you can talk to like workers and be like, hey, here's some like research about how this can positively impact not only like your wildlife but also the business. Can you maybe incorporate or see how you can incorporate this? Which that always goes back to money. I get it. But at the same time, just the effort that you're trying to do to, you know, educate yourself and educate others, that's kind of like the mission of this podcast.
Yeah.
Really. It's just education.
Absolutely. And education and spreading awareness and spreading information is a huge step. You don't always have to have all the money, all the time, all the resources in the world. You don't have to go home and make your own garden and get all your neighbors to plant their own. You don't have to do all that, but maybe just going to a local park or just going and talking to someone about it is just that facilitates that conversation, that gets the conversation started. That's a huge first step. And even after that, continuing to talk about it, build on that, getting people to keep talking about it, learning about it, and getting others to do something if you can't do something is an amazing way to get people to care about the environment and to do the right thing when it comes to the environment. That is one of the hugest parts of this bigger picture of helping the environment.
Absolutely. I mean, literally going off of that, like the whole issue with Cop City in Atlanta with South River Forest. I mean, it is one of the last standing, what they call lungs of Atlanta.
Yeah.
Where it's just like one of the last big forests in the city, which is very important for, you know, very big demographic areas like that that are like buildings and no form of, you know, native wildlife, because then you're just breathing other people's air all the time. But just that whole issue is something that I could go on and on about because it enrages me so much. But I think at the end of the day, there are a lot of people that are fighting, and that's what's important. I mean, people have lost their lives for that fight.
Yeah.
And that just shows you how serious it is. Like, it is not something to just turn a blind eye to. I mean, these spaces are really important for not only us, but for the things around us that we don't think about, which again is really hard to think about things you don't think about, but they're there and they have to be acknowledged, just like our unsung heroes.
Yes, for sure. I absolutely agree. And taking what you said about, you know, what we don't really think about, this is all a part of a better future.
Yep.
Doing what we can now to keep the planet going how it is, and if we want to keep living the lives that we are and see potentially children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, however, if we want to see people continue to go on this planet and live a great life like we do, then we need to think about these things.
Agreed. Well, that's something for y'all to take home and to think about.
Yeah, y'all think about that.
So we will see you next time. That concludes this episode, but please keep following and keep pulling on that thread for a better future as we are trying to educate you about.
Keep pulling on the thread, everybody. Just keep pulling on it.
Absolutely. Okay, bye, guys.
Bye.